Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this webinar. My name is Tanya Wilcox, and I am the Director of Partner Colleges and Scholar Programs for TheDream.Us. Joining me today, we also have Sadhana Singh, who's a Program Manager and an alum of TheDream.Us, and she will be helping us manage the webinar. Again, thank you for joining us on this webinar on how undocumented resource centers can support undocumented students. We will present results from 2 studies which highlight the need for such centers and the practices of these centers. We'll also hear from 3 leaders of such centers who will speak about their programs, how they got started, and how they're sustaining them. We had over 300 people register for this webinar, and we received many questions ahead of time. We will be responding to many of these questions, but some of them are out of the scope of this webinar. But do know that we plan to send an FAQ handout with some answers in the near future to anyone who has registered or is attending this webinar. So there are 3 organizations that are sponsoring this webinar. One is TheDream.Us. We are the largest college access and success programs for dreamers in the country. We've given scholarships to about 4,000 students nationwide, and we work with about 75 partner colleges that we believe are schools that serve undocumented students well and have a commitment to serve them. Sponsoring also this webinar is Undocu Scholars based at UCLA. They engage partners to create and further build a sustainable and effective practices for undocumented students in higher education. And then we also have the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. And this is a group of presidents, of college presidents that are dedicated to increasing public understanding of how immigration policies affect undocumented students and the practices that impact the students in communities and in campuses nationwide. So these 3 organizations have come together to put this webinar together for you. But before we start, I also want to tell you a little bit about some of the guests that are joining me in this webinar. First, we have Jesus Cisneros. He is the Assistant Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Texas in El Paso. He received a PhD in Education Policy and Evaluation from Arizona State University and an MS in Higher Education from Texas A&M University. He currently serves on the board for United We Dream and is co-founder of Dream Zone, an initiative that prepares educational leaders to support undocumented students. We also have 3 leaders from resource centers across the country. Maggie Fonseca, who is the Executive Director of Leadership Without Borders, based at the University of Washington. Then we have Ana Navarrete, who is the Program Coordinator for the Spartan Undocu Center at San Jose State University in California. And we have Gregor Miter, who's the Director of the Immigrant Services Program at Metropolitan State University in Colorado. So you will be hearing from each of these folks later on in the webinar. But before we continue, a few housekeeping items. One, know that this webinar is being recorded, and in a day or 2, we will be emailing you the recording of this webinar to your email addresses. Also know that you should be seeing a control panel similar to what you see here on this slide. And in that control panel, there's a section called handouts. In that handout section, there should be a couple of handouts for you that you can click on them and they will download directly to the computer. One is the research brief from Professor Cisneros, and the other one is actually a copy of this PowerPoint. Throughout the presentation, we will have also periods for you to be able to ask questions. There will be 2 ways that you can ask questions. You can either raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and then we will know you want to ask a question using your voice verbally, or you can type in questions in the question box in your control panel, and we will be reading those questions aloud and answering them during those periods. So with that, let me start telling you a little bit about a survey that we did at TheDream.Us. So back in the spring of this year, we knew that many of our scholars were very anxious about the fact that DACA was in jeopardy, and most of our scholars have DACA status, and there was the level of uncertainty was bringing just a lot of anxiety. So we decided to do a survey on what the impact of DACA might be on the lives of our students. And we received responses of about 1,400 of our students. And I want to tell you a little bit about what those results are. We are going to be publishing a report on this within the next few weeks, and you all will be receiving a copy of the final report. But for now, I just want to give you some of the findings and show you that. And before I start giving you the results, just a little bit of context. For you to understand, and I know most of you already know this, but I want to just go over it again, is what is the life of an undocumented student? What are they really facing? Obviously, the fear of deportation for themselves and for the family is very big, and it's affecting the mental health of our undocumented students. They, as you know, they do not have access to any federal financial aid. They have limited access to state or institutional aid. There are very few states that offer that. And they face paying out-of-state tuition in over 15 states across the country. They also do not have access to affordable health care. And in most states, they cannot sit to take licensing exams for the careers that they are choosing. And then if they don't have DACA, also undocumented students cannot work except as an independent contractors. And also without DACA, they cannot drive in most states across the country. So these are significant barriers that our students are facing. And yet, one of the amazing things about our scholars is that they're still persisting, and that they really believe education is important. So they keep going. And DACA, so a little bit about what's going on with DACA. Right now, students who have DACA can still renew their DACA, but no new applications are being accepted for students who are coming up the ranks, and if they never applied for DACA before, they can no longer get them. And the future of DACA is really uncertain. It depends on several court cases that are making it through the courts. Right now, given the rulings of those court cases, we know and we're encouraging DACA students to renew their DACA status, even if it's a year out from their expiration date. And we don't know how long that's going to stay as a possibility for them. So it's pretty uncertain of what's going to happen with DACA in the future. So what all of this is affecting our students in various ways. So our study that is going to come out in a few weeks called In Their Own Words, Higher Education, DACA and TPS is going to shed light on what the students are facing and how they're feeling about this uncertain time. So here's what we're finding. Of the 1,400 students who filled out the survey, 97% said that obtaining a college degree is very, very important to them. And 66% of them are pursuing careers that require a professional licensing. So in spite of all these challenges that the students are facing, they are they're very committed to their education. And yet, one of the challenges that is going to come up for them as they're graduating is that if they're pursuing these careers where they require a license, they might get stuck depending on the state that they live in. And we, as their allies and supporters, are going to have to figure out ways of supporting them if they get into that position. In terms of employment, the vast majority of them, over 70% of them, are employed and going to school. Of those, 19% hold more than one job, and about a third are working full-time. Also, about a third of them are providing financial support for their families. So it's not that they're just working to pay for their education, but they are also helping pay the rent or helping pay for meals or helping take care of their families. That might be their parents or siblings, or if they have children, of their children. Let's see. Oops, I'm sorry, my seems to get stuck a little bit here. Sorry about that. My thing just got frozen, but I'll have it back up here again. So let me use this one instead. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we're back. 1 second here. All right, so in terms of quality of life, 52% of our scholars who have children worry that if DACA goes away, they're going to have problems accessing childcare for their children. This is a big number. 58% of them are afraid that they will not have enough food to eat if they lose DACA because many of them won't be able to go to work. So that's going to be a huge need, and that it creates anxiety for the undocumented students. And 83% of them are very anxious about their immigration status, and even more so for their families, meaning fear of deportation, fear of what will be my future in this country because I don't have this immigration status. In terms of mobility, about 70% of our scholars hold driver's licenses, and they're using their driver's licenses to go to work or to go to school. So if they lose their driver's licenses, that's going to affect those areas in their lives too. And then about a third of them said that they're not comfortable anymore crossing state lines because they don't know what's going to happen. So as you can see, a lot of worry, but also a lot of perseverance and commitment to their education is what our scholars are reporting. Okay, so let me see if anyone has questions on what I have presented so far on the survey. So let's see. All right. So Donna, can you tell me if anyone has raised their hands? I don't see any questions that have come in the box.
No, there are no raised hands at this moment.
Okay, that is okay. So let's go on. Then I'm going to pass the presentation over to Jesus Cisneros, the professor who, along with Diana Valdivia from the University of Santa Barbara, did an entire study on centers across the country. So Jesus, why don't you go ahead and start presenting?
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine, Jesus.
Great. Well, my name is Jesus Cisneros. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at El Paso, and this reporting is in collaboration with Diana Valdivia, who's not able to join us today. Just to frame it a little bit, if we can go to the next slide, just to tell you a little bit about like what this includes. It's really to identify the approaches that several institutions are taking across the country to support undocumented students, specifically through the use of physical support structures like Undocumented Student Resource Centers. And so the purpose of the study was to highlight models for developing these resource centers within the context of higher education. So how did people do it? How did they emerge on campus? What do they do? How do they do it? And then what are the benefits of doing this work, not only for undocumented students, but also for institutions? Next slide, please. So you will see that for us, we in order to do this, we wanted to take a snapshot of the landscape of resource centers across the country. And so what we did is we tapped into our networks through, for me, through United We Dream and through professional organizations, through my colleague, through her own network as an employee of the state of California. And so Google searches, among other things, right? but we identified approximately 56 resource centers for undocumented students across the country as of the date of this report. And so just to define undocumented student resource centers a little bit more, it's physical support structures, so like a space that is dedicated on campus as a center for undocumented students. And so we identified about 56, but I say and more because the more and more that we conducted interviews, the more that we became aware of other centers that were emerging, of other centers that were being inaugurated, and or plans for other centers in the coming years. And so this number will increase. And also, this number does not include institutions that have practitioners in these positions, but do not necessarily have a center, right? So this is specific to undocumented student resource centers, Dreamer resource centers, immigrant student resource centers, etc. So physical support structures, physical spaces on campus. And so this number translated to about 31 universities, so 4-year institutions, and about 25 community colleges. Next slide, please. And so it kind of looks like this, right? We see an overrepresentation, right, in just this map in California. And so California, across its different systems for higher education, the UC system, the CSU, and the community college systems, have kind of led the way for a lot of this work happening across the country. We see 46 in California, and then we see 3 in Texas and about 1 in other states, including Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, Florida, um, and New Jersey, right? And so I just wanted to show you a depiction of what this looks like because it kind of shows you a little bit of where this trend in higher education is kind of happening and where some of our pioneers for this work are situated. Next slide. So, in terms of the undocumented student resource centers, I want to talk to you a little bit about the models. And I say models in the sense of what do they look like and how do they function, how are they structured, right? And so, many of the institutions that we interviewed were standalone centers. And so, standalone centers, what that means to us is that they were defined as undocumented student resource centers, meaning they were specifically only tailored for undocumented students. So it was specific to undocumented immigrants, right? And so the pros of taking a standalone approach towards resource centers is the intentionality that practitioners can devote to working with undocumented students. The intentionality and the expertise, the training, the capacity that individuals have to focus on the specific population. Now, the cons of having standalone centers is, of course, capacity, right? Many institutions that we talk to and many centers were functioning off of either one full-time position or a couple of part-time positions that were really running the center for the institution. And so the staffing became an issue. And then, of course, funding, as within other aspects of higher education, funding is always an issue, but more so within undocumented student resource centers, given the breadth of the work, which I'll describe in a little bit, and the challenges for securing and sustaining the financial support through the institution, through private donors, and or through partner organizations. So beyond standalone centers, we also had a combination of international student centers and undocumented student centers. And so what this meant for several institutions is that they dedicated a space, a physical structure for immigrants, for undocumented students and international students all at the same time. And so the pros of taking this approach is, of course, the immigration expertise, right? So you're able to talk about international students and how that differs from undocumented students and how that differs from other student populations on campus. Now, the cons to taking this approach, as we found from our practitioners, is the role that the Student Exchange Visitor Program, so the CVP, and USCIS take within the function of working with international students specifically, right? And how that contrasts the work that practitioners would have to do within the Center for Undocumented Students, right? Because we know that ICE, USCIS, and those processes can discourage students from perhaps participating in these centers or taking part of the work because of the threat that that poses. Not only SEVP, but also the information system for tracking student exchange and visitors and international students, right? Um, that there's challenges in terms of how to keep those functions of the work for international students separate from the work with undocumented students. Beyond that, also practitioners talked about training and expectations. So how do you train someone to be like the de facto staff member for both undocumented students and international students while giving them the the time and the dedication that they need as individual and separate and distinct communities without kind of conflating this idea of international undocumented students as one student population. Um, Another model that kind of emerged and that was a little bit more popular was the multicultural and slash dream centers. So these are spaces that were not only multicultural student centers, but also dream centers simultaneously. And so the pros of doing this is that it's a space dedicated for students of color and undocumented students. Um, However, the cons, again, is the lack of awareness sometimes or the expertise in immigration specifically, right? And again, the challenge of having de facto staff kind of serving as both a generalist for students of color and undocumented students at the same time. And so you lose some of that intentionality, as some of our practitioners talked about. And then the last thing that I'll mention is those institutions that didn't have a physical center, but they had staff dedicated for working with undocumented students, whether it was part-time or they had time allocated from their everyday responsibilities to work with undocumented students specifically. Next slide, please. So what I want to go into now beyond the models is just kind of the resources and services that are provided by these centers. And so what we gauged from across the 50 some institutions that we talked to was that they were being very innovative in terms of the resources and services that they were providing. So, for example, some centers had office hours that were taken on by members from counseling service, from career services, from financial aid, or even legal services, where these individuals would be in the center and talk to students or meet with students during office hours that they would kind of conduct. And so that was very innovative because it's a form of bringing the services to the students to a space where they feel comfortable engaging with practitioners and where they may, perceive that the people that are being welcomed into the space are already allies versus taking a risk doing that. And then in terms of resources, there was so much innovation from institutions. And so this is just a snapshot, right? But everything from lending libraries where students could literally borrow books for their semester and return them. And so it was a way of kind of sharing and donating books and checking it out and checking them back in so that students didn't have to incur always the cost of buying books for the semester. Emergency grants that extended not just for tuition purposes, but also for legal issues, right? Like someone being detained in a family or someone facing a deportation hearing or proceeding, etc. And so emergency grants garnered to a holistic approach to working with undocumented students. Food pantries, meal vouchers, of course, as related with the food
I think we lost
insecurity.
you.
I'm still here. Can you hear me? So the food pantry and the meal vouchers kind of
Yeah,
respond.
okay, we hear you again. Yeah, we can hear you again.
Thanks. So responding to the food insecurity that was talked about earlier in the survey, bus passes, and then everything from scholarships, right? So creative ways in which students can be compensated for their time without actually like being framed as compensation, but more as scholarships, honorariums that are affiliated with internships or other leadership responsibilities within the center, particularly for students that are not DACA recipients. And then for states that had state-based financial aid available, work study programs, right, that really delved or that utilize state funds to create these work study programs, very similar to the federal work study program, but rather something that students who are undocumented or DACA recipients would be able to benefit from. So these are just some examples that I wanted to highlight. And the last two that I'll mention is like this idea of peer mentorship, right? Being in a space, a physical space, where you can see other undocumented students and talk to other undocumented students and engage in other high impact practices, not only with peers, but also with the coordinators or the leadership within the center, because oftentimes the coordinators, the directors of these centers were undocumented themselves, DACA recipients, or formerly undocumented practitioners, right? And so again, it creates this idea of possibility models for students that is empowering and that serves as a source of support. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then just to talk about the nuances of the work. So I mentioned a lot in the last slide, and of course, it takes a lot from these practitioners to be able to facilitate this work for students. And so it takes a holistic approach to be able to work with undocumented students who already are facing fear, anxiety because of the social political climate, because of changes in policy, etc. And so it's not only about treating students as students, right? But rather as individuals, as human beings who are emotional and may have physical and psychological responses to what's going on. The job position entails fundraising, programming, and a lot of this, the fundraising, because again, it takes work to be able to secure funding for the center to be able to be sustainable beyond some of the infrastructures that institutions have for supporting these spaces. The programming, again, just for students and for organizations, etc. But community partnerships also became very important for many of these centers. Community partnerships in the sense of bringing legal services into the spaces so that they could provide pro bono services for DACA workshops or for filling out DACA applications and or for just making communities aware of their rights, making communities aware of potential pathways to citizenship or relief, among other things. Those are just some examples. But of course, advocating for students, being at the table within different spaces at the institution to be able to advocate with and for students. And then the community advocacy piece, because we know that as part of these positions, you're not just working within the institution, but also outside of the institution to really show up for students who are doing organizing work, but for supporting some of the existing structures. But coordinators, we also found, served as not only institutional experts, meaning that they had to really own and dominate every function of the university as it related to undocumented students and inform others about how financial aid impacted undocumented students, how career licensing, etc., affected undocumented students, housing, and just identifying policies that could serve as barriers, but also as just the content experts. So whenever something happened within the social political climate and an institution had to respond, oftentimes coordinators, directors of these centers served as the content experts, having to kind of respond to some of these issues and inform other people how to address the community, how to address the institution. And so those are just some things that I wanted to highlight. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so just to end, before I pose some questions for you, just broadly, there's benefits and challenges, right, to working within the context of undocumented student resource centers. But I'm going to highlight some of the benefits more than anything. And so, of course, one of the main benefits is how we help support and make students feel, right? This includes feeling welcome, supported, legitimized by the institution, validated, empowered, and the sense of belonging that students are able to derive from being able to just have physical support structures on campus catered to them. And then for the institution, we also need to recognize that in supporting undocumented students through their education, we're also recruiting for the university, right? Because students see that the campus is welcoming and that they have structures available. Students are able to persist. We improve numbers in terms of retention because we help students towards graduation. And so those are just some of the things that we have within our toolbox to talk about the benefits of undocumented student resource centers, because they provide not only support for the individuals, but also for the institution. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so some questions that I have just for you to ask yourself and maybe to bring in at the end of this discussion is, how do you translate the value of an undocumented student resource center for institutions of higher education? So in other words, how do you advocate for creating these spaces within your institution in ways that are supportive of the work that perhaps you, students, or allies are already doing within your respective institution? And then in what ways can this research brief, help support that work and influence higher education institutions and systems to develop some of these support structures for students, whether it's resource centers or just positions within the institution that work specifically with undocumented students, to increase some of the staffing within existing resource centers so that the work is not just placed on one individual, but rather there's increased capacity through multiple positions. And then equity, just as part of the mission of higher education and supporting all students. Next slide, please. And then I'll end with this, and this is just a couple more questions for you, and I'll leave these on here. You can read for yourself.
Go ahead, Jesus. This is the next slide.
Yeah, so these are just some questions for you to think about and for you to kind of ask yourselves within your respective states.
Jesus, I think we might have lost you for a few minutes, for a second there.
So if you just think of these and consider them, and if you have any questions, we can address them at the end.
Okay, while we get Jesus back, maybe we can take some questions that have come in. So I'm looking at the questions that have come in through the chat box, and someone is talking about, oh, he's talking fine. Okay, so it's just me. Go ahead, Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, I'm done. We can go to the.
So then we have great. So now we have questions that have come in. And here's a question for you, Jesus. One is, we are aware in Illinois, there's several resource centers that Tania Cabrera is telling us exist there, and she's asking if there are reason why those were not included in your map or in your study.
Yeah, so many of the centers that we talked about were literally identified via people in the network, via individuals within organizations that kind of were aware of these places. It's also the idea of, like, you know, what is publicly available for students and just prospective students or just general audiences to find. And so many of the institutions that we included in here are those that we were able to find based on broad public searches, right? And so, as I mentioned earlier, we included 56, but there's probably more, right? Those are just the ones that we were able to identify and talk to. And so, the other thing that I will mention is that some of the criteria for being part of this, right? And I spoke to a couple people from Illinois actually, but they were not included in this study specifically because of the criteria that we wanted to focus on DREAM resource centers, of undocumented student resource centers, based on the criteria of having a physical space on campus dedicated as a center. And so we either may have missed it because we weren't able to identify it within public searches, or the institution or the center didn't meet like the criteria for the search. However, I will say that if you have some of those institutions and centers that you're aware of, by all means, if you can share that with us, I would love to be able to connect with them to include some of the perspectives from other centers as a follow-up to this study. So thank you for highlighting that, Tanya.
Okay, here's another question for you. A couple of questions regarding employment opportunity for students that don't have DACA. This person would like to know if you found any universities that are exploring independent contracting as a way to helping these students.
Unfortunately, not independent contracting as far as we talked to coordinators. No one brought it up specifically, but opportunities that individuals brought up to not hire, but to uh, extend educational opportunities for students is through scholarships, honorariums, and stipends, meaning that centers would provide scholarships for students that would provide some kind of financial allowance and that had service requirements for the center, meaning that the students were able to be engaged in the center to do work, programming, leadership experiences, and they got a scholarship or an honorarium or a stipend, right? Because we know that we can't pay or compensate students as employment because of their immigration status, but we can offer scholarships, stipends, and honorariums. And so there was very creative ways in which institutions did this. And so those are just some examples.
Right. So Donna, do you have any raised hands of someone who would like to ask a question?
Yes, we have a few raised hands. I will call on Kevin Noriega. You can now ask your question.
Hi, Jesus. Great meeting you. Thank you for your time. I have a question in regards to compensating dreamers. What about grants? What are the are there any limitations in regards to compensating dreamers with grants?
As far as I know, and again, this is just from conversations with individuals because many of these centers were funded by grants or donations, etc. It's the ways in which it is written. So if you create a line item or budget for scholarships, for stipends or honorariums through grant monies, then that's totally doable, right? And you just have to work with your financial aid office or within your accounts receivable office to be able to do that as a stipend, honorarium, or scholarship. But employment-wise, I haven't heard of ways in which grants have been able to kind of go around that.
And in your conversation with those individuals, did they mention anything with regards to compensating dreamers through Title III grants?
No,
Okay.
they
And I know I understand you're not an expert in that subject, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain, see if maybe you had some information. So I do appreciate this.
no. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Okay, so Donna, let's take one more question from the hands raised, and then we're going to move on. And I will bring in the directors of the different resource centers because they'll be able to also continue answering your questions. But let's take one more for now, so Donna.
Okay, we have Donna Walker. Donna, you can ask your question. Donna, can you hear us? Okay. How about Maria Sotomayor? You can ask your question, Maria. Maria, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I'll try Jeanette Manzanero. Jeanette, can you hear us?
Okay, so Donna, let's then just go ahead and then we can ask people later on for more questions. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we have three great leaders at these universities, Magdalena Fonseca, Gregor Miter, and Ana Navarrete, who will tell you a little bit about the work that they do at their schools. And first, we have Ana from San Jose State University. And Ana, if you could talk a little bit about what your center does, but then you are a new center. So the Undocumented Student Center has been around only for about a year at San Jose State. If you can talk about the journey that the university went through in order to start this center. What was the impetus? What were some of the challenges? And how you overcame those challenges? Or how did the university overcome those challenges? So go ahead, Ana.
Thank you so much, Tania. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Ana Navarrete, Program Coordinator of the Undocumented Student Resource Center. So our center is actually about 8 or 9 months old. We opened our doors late January of this year. And since January, we've really been working towards finding ways in which we can collaborate with the current campus partners that we have and really expand the work that we're doing and really extend that capacity with our campus partners. So the efforts to have the center open, as it has been mentioned already, really came from students. In 2004, a student organization came about called SAHE, Student Advocates for Higher Education, where they really did a lot of work to educate community members around the needs of undocumented students, as well as provide their own students with that place of community and support that they need in order to get through college. Since then, a number of resolutions have been passed through the Associated Student Government here on campus. But in 2015 alone, the Associated Students Board of Directors passed a resolution to institutionalize resources for undocumented students, and that included the establishment of a resource center. The resolutions came about at a very important time for San Jose State, where we opened up alongside the Chicanx Latinx Student Success Center and the African American Black Student Success Center. So the opening of these three centers really kind of became the catalyst for students to be able to demand ongoing support for their own needs and for their community. Since then, we've had a number of faculty and staff come forward saying that they want to support our students, especially as we're hearing about all these raids that are taking place in our local communities and the fear that they're creating. As well as the constant resigning of programs such as DACA and TPS and all that fear that's creating within our students. So having that support of faculty and staff has been really instrumental in just gaining momentum as a center, not just having it open, but actually getting people on board on what the role of the center is on our campus. That it's not just a center for students to come and receive personal support, but that it's going to be a center that will also provide recommendations to the different campus partners that we have, such as, what are some things that need to be addressed in the admission process? How can we do better outreach to our local community high schools to provide them with the right information so their students can be prepared for the moment that they come in? So finding those main offices that will help extend this information to our communities has been really important. And not just that, but this past September, our academic senate, which is composed of faculty members here at San Jose State, passed a sense of the Senate resolution, which essentially said and made a recommendation to the president, which said that, as faculty members, it is our responsibility to ensure that this information is given out to students, and that faculty also take it upon themselves to learn more about how to best support undocumented students by participating in Undocumented trainings, attending events, and also just meeting with local experts as to what they can do to better assist students. And another really important thing that has come out of these past few months has been the increasing support from the community. So Santa Clara County, we're really fortunate to have an Office of Immigrant Relations where they've been doing a lot of work already around community safety, such as rapid response networks and DACA clinics, as well as other legal clinics. So we've been bringing in them on campus to just focus on that need of our students, and of course to bring in faculty and staff to join these rapid response networks. So with everything that's been going on, we've been trying to build onto the resources that already exist, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. Some of the challenges that we have been facing, of course, comes with the fear that students have about their information. How do we keep track of the utilization of the center without making students feel like we're collecting their information and that it can be used in the wrong way? So we're working on ways that we can do assessments of utilization of resources in order to see and determine what are some successful programming that we've had and what are some additional needs. Another challenge that we also are facing is creating resources or internship opportunities for those who don't have DACA or don't have any form of work permit or don't even qualify for in-state tuition in California. That has been really challenging because while some institutions have been able to implement programming such as research opportunities that provide some sort of stipend, we do recognize that here at San Jose State, we have certain internal policies that make that difficult. So working on identifying who are the people that we need to talk to, what are our options to open up these opportunities to students. It's something that we hope to get more information on in the upcoming months. But so far, we've been doing a lot of outreach to students to just let them know of what their rights are, what are the resources that they have access to, and really break down the rumors of, you know, if you don't have DACA, that this can happen to your financial aid, or you know, anything along those lines. Another challenge I think it's really important to bring up is the cost of living. We know that most campuses already have extremely high rates for housing costs and meal costs. But when you live in the Bay Area, that really hits across the board, whether you live on campus or off campus. So it's really difficult to support students in that end when we already have a housing market that's really tough, where the cost for renting an apartment goes over $2,000 a month. And on top of that, when you don't have a social security number, if you don't have DACA, it makes it more difficult for you to be able to rent a place here in the Bay Area. But so far, as we continue moving forward, we're working with community partners to bring in more information for our students so they can make the right decisions for themselves. Work with local organizations such as Immigrants Rising to bring in information and workshops around independent contracting and what students can do to prepare for life after college. So really giving our students with as much information as needed, regardless of if it only applies to DACA students or non-DACA students, it's going to be really important for us to continue doing that and reminding our campus partners to keep that in mind as well, that when we're talking and advocating for resources, that we're keeping in mind that there are certain undocumented students that don't qualify for what's already available.
Thank you, Anna, so much for that. Next, I am going to pass it on to our next presenter, Gregor from Metropolitan State University. Now, as you talk about your center, please address the fact that you guys have a somewhat of a different model. You have gone with the Immigrant Services Program as opposed to a center that serves only undocumented students. So tell us how the school decided to go with that model instead of a Dream Resource Centers. Go ahead, Gregor.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, Tanya. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So the Immigrant Services Program at Metropolitan State University was actually created quite a long time ago, comparatively speaking, in the late 80s, initially to address the loss of an English second language program due to some changes in higher education law here in the state of Colorado. And so initially, it really was primarily a social and a language development support program in the late 80s and in the early 90s. But once Colorado passed in-state tuition for our Dreamer students, which happened a little more than 6 years ago, thankfully the mission of the center really began to shift to focus a lot more on our undocumented students than it did before. And we actually saw a growth of almost 4 times the number of students that we had. So initially, while the program served maybe 50, 60, 70 students, we now serve close to 330 students. And here at Metro, we serve most of the Dreamer, the DACA undocumented students in the state of Colorado. So a lot of that has to do with the passage of in-state tuition for our Dreamer students. And of course, with the passage of DACA as well. So as the Immigrant Services Program, even though probably around 3/4 of the students that we serve through the Immigrant Services Program are Dreamer students. We also work with our refugee, our ESL student population, and really with the immigrant population at large. So in that sense, it is a somewhat unusual or somewhat different structure in that de facto we are in many ways a Dreamer support program. But that is not exclusively the population that we work with. So then to address some of the information that you can actually see on the screen, we have a little over 400 DACA undocumented students here at Metro. Again, that number has really grown over the last couple of years, in part because the institution has really stepped up its initiatives and its support for Dreamer students in a number of different ways that I can address in a little bit. What we have noticed too at Immigrant Services Program is as we're collecting data on our students, we notice that the slightly higher GPA, but the unfortunately also much lower full-time enrollment for our immigrant as well as for our DACA undocumented students is really severe. And we've actually been able to use that information to push the institution further a little bit to provide additional support to our Dreamer students and to just think more proactively about what are some of the things that the institution has to do to better support the students. So not to cut ahead too much, but as an advice to other institutions is to really look at what does the data say about the Dreamer students that you're working with, and how can you use that to make a little bit more of an impact, or to have a little bit more of a push for upper administration to ask for better funding, staffing, or donor-funded initiatives, something along those lines. Some of the things that we do mirrors what San Jose State is doing as well. So we're bringing in immigration attorneys. We have social events. We are making sure, of course, that students, when they're coming in, that they are that they have a place and a home where they can feel supported, ask questions regarding their immigration status and financial aid. We had a really great health insurance program in the state of Colorado that was actually very much supportive and a great resource for our DACA undocumented individuals in the state of Colorado. Unfortunately, that recently went away, and so it falls to an office like ours to then find alternatives or ways to address that. In terms of some of the social events that we're doing, we had our first on-campus Dreamer graduation last year and partnered with the University of Colorado, Denver, to actually bring their Dreamers and our graduating Dreamers into the same space and celebrate their graduation with their family and friends. And that was actually a really, really wonderful event. Some of the other things that we've done, again, sort of pushing our upper administration and the president's office to be more vocal and be more upfront about their support. We've asked them to essentially immediately after the termination of DACA was proposed by the federal government, we asked upper administration, including the chief of police, the head of the counseling center, the president's office, various faculty, DACA and undocumented students, to serve on a highly publicized panel to address some urgent questions that students, faculty, and staff had about safety on campus, about the sustainability and the continuation of in-state tuition and financial aid options that exist. So those are some of the things that we're doing at the Immigrant Services Program here.
Great. Thank you, Gregor, for that. And now let me introduce you to Maggie, who runs the Leadership Without Borders at the University of Washington. And Maggie, as you talk a little bit about your center, you've been around for several years doing this kind of work. If you could talk a little bit about sustainability in terms of support from the university and also the financial, one leadership support and the other one financial support? How are you sustaining your center over many years? Go ahead, Maggie.
Thank you for the introduction, Tanya. Just to give you a little bit of context and perspective from where I'm coming from. So our campus model is a multicultural center, dream center model, as Jesus spoke a little bit earlier. We are situated in Seattle, Washington. We are the flagship institution. We are a predominantly white institution with 46,000 students on our campus. And out of those 46,000 students, because we do have Washington State financial aid. Rough numbers for our campus is around 433. And then self-identified students who are served by our program is around 180. So key to our success to some degree is that we work very hard to make sure that we provide opportunities across campus with our partners for students to self-identify so they can get the resources in the service and services. We are housed, again, through the Ethnic Cultural Center, which is an established program. We have been on campus for about 47 years, and our funding source comes from services and activity fees. So one of the things that we have been able to do, and along the work with undocumented students, personally for myself, I've been doing this work since 2001 on my own without kind of like that support system across campus that is necessary. But time has changed or passed and laws have changed, which has made it a little bit easier for us to get a little bit more support. In 2014, we applied for and were awarded an innovation grant for funding to start the Leadership Without Borders program. And after about a successful 9 months, we submitted our data and report to our funding source. And upon the committee's recommendation, we applied for permanent funding. In 2015, we were awarded $95,000 to support the program itself. So that was really key, the success of our program. And specifically, for those of you that are not familiar with services and activities, it's funds that are collected through registration fees from all the students that are on campus. So to have a student entity be able to support a program such as undocumented students, it's such a, especially when it's a small population that we're serving, I thought was really great. It showed great commitment on the student side that there is support on our campus for our vulnerable population. Key to our success in terms of the funding and sustainability, as Tanya mentioned, is that we are part of a physical space, again, established social justice program within our cultural center. We are known across campus as a safe space and home away from home for all students of color and vulnerable populations. We are a standalone 3-story, 25,000 square foot building. So we really are the only program here. We get to manage the day-to-day operations. So it's a lot of flexibility in the type of programming that we can provide for our populations. So in 2014, when I co-founded this program with the former executive director, it was one of those situations where we said, okay, we're not gonna ask for permission, we're gonna ask for forgiveness. We have the space, we're going to create the program. We have some funding already because we do have revenue streams from being able to rent out our facility, and that really helped us out. In addition to that, our general staffing model is such that we are all embedded in this work. We're social justice driven. So even though myself and the coordinator for Leadership Without Borders are the only ones that probably have more of the subject matter experts, the entire staff does go through training and is able to get pulled in to do participate in our Undocumented Ally training or participate in any of the programming that we provide directly to our student population. In addition to that, I have to say that, you know, living in the Seattle area is liberal, so I would say that people are definitely more receptive to openly supporting undocumented population, and not just on the surface level, but true advocacy towards policy changes, and that really shows up within offices and departments through changes in scholarships, specifically geared towards undocumented students. There was a creation of a food insecurity program. There's emergency funding and access to legal representation both on and off campus through student legal services, our School of Law on campus, and then also the partnerships that we have off campus as well. So, and then just other specialized resources specifically for undocumented students, depending on the department or office and what they can offer. But key to that specific area as well, though, is that we have an administration that is open about supporting and advocating for this population. Our president did come out and made a statement post-election in support of undocumented students. I think that really set up the entire campus to have that understanding and know that they're going to be supported if they are, start to make changes or provide specific support for our students. And lastly, I would say that connections and partnerships with practitioners and institutions on best practices across Washington State. We cannot do this work alone, and so in conjunction with my key contacts or allies in other institutions has been really important, because we talk to each other constantly. What's happening on your campus and how are you dealing with that? And then lastly, of course, is we cannot do this work without the students. And so at the forefront, every move that we make to some extent, it involves our undocumented student population, letting us know what their needs are, guiding us through our work, and making sure that they have a voice in this process, because they are the ones that we are providing the support. So as you can see from the slide, we do have one of our biggest programming is that Husky lending library. It absolutely makes a big difference, and we get that feedback all the time from students. We have been able to, since fall started, we have been able to save students over $30,000 in just that lending library. In addition to that, like some of the other programming, we do student leadership development, workshops on how to navigate this large university, to knowing your rights workshops, WASFA and DACA workshops, and anything that might be coming up depending on what's happening on the campus climate as well as the bigger US climate.
Thank you, Maggie, for that. And I'm gonna go ahead and unmute our other panelists right now, because we're gonna move on to the panel portion of this presentation, and then we will also be taking questions from all of you who are attending the webinar. So first, if one of the panelists could address the question of, are there political implications to serving Dreamers? And if there are, what are those, and how have you managed them? So Anna, Greg, or Maggie, if anyone would like to take that on.
I can start if that's okay. One of the biggest changes that I have seen on our campus is, because we are, again, we had this message come from our top administrator, the president of the university. It really has allowed, again, the rest of the campus to know that if our top administrator is supporting this vulnerable population, that everyone else is going to start to follow suit. And so I think for us on this campus specifically, it really made a commitment to the diversity that gets touted on our websites and that gets touted on our brochures as we're recruiting students onto campus.
Thank you, Maggie. And Jesus, feel free to join this panel also if you have some words. Anything else from anyone else that would like to address this question?
Yeah, I can follow up a little bit just to reiterate. That's absolutely true for us as well. That the president's office, their outspoken advocacy for our Dreamer and undocumented students has not just helped us speak more clearly to each other, faculty and staff here on campus, but we occasionally go to high schools where we know a lot of our Dreamer students come from. So Immigrant Services will occasionally join admissions. And if we can say and show in writing that a very strongly worded letter of support that's come from our president's office, that's just been, we know that really connects with community members, with teachers at high schools, with students. And so that's definitely something to reiterate. And then just quickly, I think one of the things that we talk about in the Undocumented training, which is an ally training that we took from United We Dream and are putting on here on campus, and we always make sure to point out that even though there's of course a political dimension right now, especially over the last couple of years, to supporting immigrant students, that was really not, it wasn't always the case, and really it shouldn't be the case, because we exist to ensure that students have equitable, fair access to education, and the data shows us that for our Dreamer students, they are facing so many huge hurdles to even just enrolling and finding their way into higher education, that really, while there may well be a political dimension that people are attaching to Dreamer support, it is really ultimately about supporting students who oftentimes have the hardest way into and through higher education.
So that's a good segue to the next question, Gregor. How do you show the leadership at school what the value of these centers are to the institutions? So tell us a little bit about how you show value, any of you in the panel.
Well, I can finish my thought from just now. I think we have actually seen that many other student populations are recognizing the value of being at an institution where the most marginalized, the most underrepresented, the most underserved students are supported, that they want to attend an institution that really supports Dreamer students. So for us, we've just seen that students who do not have immigrant background, who do not have citizenship statuses, immigration statuses that are keeping them from accessing resources, we've just seen that that's something that by and large is supported.
Okay, thank you. How about you? Go ahead, Maggie.
For us and at the University of Washington, I will say that it has definitely, somebody said it best the other day, and I'll share with you real quickly. The university, a lot of universities or brochures and websites love diversity. You always see people of color, vulnerable populations, again, touted on those publications. But the true commitment is really going to come out once you're step foot on the campus. And I think in this way, it demonstrates from the institution the commitment to diversity, and how that has manifested for us is that it helps with the self-identification process for our students. No longer timid to some extent and worried that they're not going to be supported. They're a little bit more open to coming out and seeking at those services, advocating for themselves. One of the other things that I also as well is our general student population. They're coming to our undocumented student program, and the students themselves asking, how can we help, how can we support? And so that's some of the things that this program has added value to the.
Okay, I think Maggie, you might be we might be losing you for a little bit. So let's take Anna. Do you have any comments on this question about how do you show value to San Jose State, or anything from Jesus what you've seen?
Yes. So from the things that we've seen and the things that we share with administration and faculty is, I mean, the value of the center is really to support the graduation rates that the university is pushing for, and of course to also return the support and to cultivate a group of students who want to come back and return the support and continue providing more opportunities for other students. Because if there's something that immigrants bring to the table, is they are innovators. They have open doors and opportunities for other people that are coming after them. So cultivating a group of students and supporting them in their process and in their mission towards completing a degree and going into these different fields also gives us the opportunity to learn about how do they go through, how do they do this, and how can we best support the generation that comes after them. And and most importantly, it's also just investing in young people who bring in new knowledge and new ideas and perspective into the research that institutions are doing and into the work that we're doing. So it's really important for us to be able to show that in the ways that students are involved on campus, the type of research that they do, and supporting these initiatives that students are asking for, and the services that they're asking for on campuses.
Thank you, Anna. And I would love to hear from everyone on the panel with this question. For those institutions that are considering starting a center on their campus, or even just beginning to start up some support services for undocumented students, what is your #1 advice for them?
Well, this is Jesus Cisneros. I asked this question to many of the institutions that I interviewed for our study, and what many practitioners said is let the students lead it. They're already doing the work, and they're already creating some of these pathways, and so student involvement, undocumented students, need to be at the forefront of these efforts in collaboration and in support or being supported by faculty and staff, task forces for undocumented student support services at the institution, advisory boards for developing these centers on campus. And so a lot of this work is already being done by students through UndocuAlly trainings, Dream Zone trainings, UndocuPeers, etc. And so really fostering what is already happening and streamlining it to make a more concerted effort to speak to the administration about the needs and directly and explicitly asking for a resource center, not just support, but really defining what that support looks like.
Thank you, Jesus. Anyone else? What would be your #1 advice?
I wanted to just say I second what Jesus just described. My #1 advice would be that it really has to be a campus-wide effort. And again, it's following the work that students are already doing. They're the ones that are going to be, should be at the forefront. But being very strategic across, within who gets invited to be a part of whatever, whether it's an ad hoc advisory, a task force committee, as Jesus mentioned, it really has to be folks from all over campus. That buy-in is so important. So I would say that's one of my key advice.
Thank you, Maggie. And Anna?
To add on to what folks have already said, would also be to invite some of those key folks to programs and events where students are at, so they can see the type of work that students are doing or the type of work that's already happening on campus. Because a lot of the time there's this fear of whether or not that the work that the university is being asked to do, whether it's legal or not. And it's understandable why they ask those questions, but to really put them in the spaces and inviting them to these spaces so they can see the resiliency that comes from these students, and to really know like what are best ways to problem solve, and the creative ways to problem solve for a lot of these issues.
Thank you, Anna. And Gregor, anything from you?
I guess just to illustrate the point even more, how important students are during allied trainings on our campus. They're long, they're very well developed and updated and researched, but time and again, out of the hundreds of faculty and staff that attend them, what they find most valuable and what just leaves the greatest mark on them is when students come in and they share their own voice. So yeah, just to reiterate how important it is, and really how much power the student's voice carries. And I guess to also add is again, and we've already addressed that, but it's if upper leadership really isn't swayed by the students advocating, turn it back on them and say, supporting this student population is really an issue related to recruitment, retention, and graduation. we can print all the glossy brochures that we want, but it's the friends and families of the Dreamer students that we successfully support in college that are going to follow them to the institute.
Yeah, and adding to what Gregor just mentioned, I would also say, like, when that language doesn't speak to the administration, then show them the research that says, look at your peer institutions across the country and what they are doing to support undocumented students, and how are you keeping pace with these trends in higher education, and how are you making yourself marketable as an institution that is inclusive and upholding the mission and vision of the institution for inclusive excellence.
Thank you, everybody. So we're going to take questions now. We have several questions that have come in through the panel, and anybody can answer who's on the panel. One question that's come in is, how do you track who the undocumented or DACA students are on your campus?
So this is Anna. There's no way for us to track it, and we haven't asked those questions for students since it's a really private matter. What we do is that when we promote services or opportunities, we try to be equitable by mentioning who can qualify for certain resources, and of course providing alternative options for those who don't qualify for opportunities that would otherwise require DACA.
Anyone else? Thoughts on have you?
This is Maggie. I wanted to just mention at our institution, we don't really keep track of that either, but one partnership that we have had for the last several years is working with our sister unit, the Multicultural Outreach Recruitment area, and they have recruiters that recruit for students of color on campus, and they're all trained on how to work with undocumented students. And so when they go out to the high schools to do campus visitations, we're very intentional to make sure that we always have a couple of slides on there to mention if undocumented students happen to be in the audience, that we showcase that we do have a program on campus, that the campus is for undocumented students, and then therefore that increases our numbers of self-identification, and more than likely students, even before they apply for admissions or before and after they get admitted, they will come and visit our center while they're in high school or in between, just to try to get more information about what's offered on campus.
And Gregor, you gave us a number. It seemed like you knew how many students were on MSU. How do you know that number?
Yeah, so the only thing we track to some degree is certain immigration statuses that all get lumped in together. So we actually don't know the exact number of our purely quote-unquote undocumented students, but we do know the number of students who have DACA, are undocumented, and then a couple other much more rare specific immigration statuses. So we can kind of sort of triangulate what that approximate number is, probably plus minus 10 to 20%, I would say. But we don't have a very explicit way, and for obvious reasons, don't really want to develop a very explicit way by which we know who is undocumented, who has DACA, and so on. So yeah.
Okay. Another question is, could you tell a little bit about how big your staff is and approximately how much your budgets are? Anyone would care to share that?
So I can start. This is Maggie. As I indicated, right now we have about $103,000 permanent funding. We have one coordinator that is the main coordinator for the space, and then we hire 3 student employees. They're all undocumented students. In addition, as Jesus spoke earlier, we also provide additional opportunities for students who don't have DACA or WASFA. As a way to bring in a little bit of funding, we hire interns, and we do pay them a stipend on a quarterly basis. So that way, one, they get an opportunity to create community, and they're making some additional funding, because we know that for them it's really tough.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is Anna, San Jose State. So I'm the only full-time staff person at the center. We do have a group of 4 undergraduate interns, and they are paid through the general fund that we have. We do have about $50,000 of yearly funds towards the center for programming and for other expenses. But we are working on finding funding aside from the programming fund that we have to hire a graduate student to do a little bit more work around graduate student needs and also doing student assessments. We have a faculty fellow that's assigned to us through a program here through the university. So they are granted release time from teaching. So it grants us additional staffing and support without necessarily having to come out of our budget. We're hoping that when we can address a little bit more in detail, like what our needs, who are our student population, we can possibly increase the number of full-time staff.
Right.
The Immigrant Services Program in Denver, Colorado, we have 3 full-time staff and also about a little over $15,000 yearly budget. The majority of that goes towards hourly wages for DACA peer mentors, since they obviously can't get any federal work stuff.
And related to this, some questions regarding how you have been able to raise funds, and either has anyone thought of setting up an endowment for the center?
This is Anna. For funding right now, we're looking into crowdsourcing as one of the immediate ways to do it, to fundraise for some of our services that we want to implement. So with bigger funding, it's done normally through the university. So we have a point of contact at the Tower Foundation. It's a little more challenging to try to get the university to lead efforts towards an endowment, but hopefully within a year, as we provide more details about who our students are, doing a little more assessment, we can possibly ask to pursue for an endowment. But we do, ongoing. We accept ongoing donations at any point.
And this is Maggie. Because we're part of the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity, which is a major department on campus, it's been on campus for 50 years. We do have a full-time, or a team, I should say, our advancement team, who goes out and, of course, tries to bring in funding for our entire program. Most recently, about a year ago, we had some folks that came through our center and wanted to know more about the work that the Ethnic Cultural Center does. They were really impressed with our program and specifically the lending library. And so they left a state gift that hopefully in the future we will have some funding that is designated specifically towards Leadership Without Borders.
Great. So Donna, do we have any raised hands?
Yes, so we have a few raised hands, and for the attendees, if you've raised your hand, I'm going to call on your name. So please listen out for your name, and I will unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your question. So first, we have Yuriana Garcia. Yuriana, you can ask your question. Yuriana, can you hear us? Okay, I'll try someone else. Idolina or Idolina? You can ask your question now.
Oh, hi. Oh, hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
We want to know how we can partner with the DreamUS Scholarship Organization. How do we add our community college to that?
Well, right now the Dream.Us is not seeking new partnerships. We already have 75 colleges that we partner with. But if you are interested, I would say you can send me an email and we will add you to a list of potential future colleges so that if at any point we are looking for new partnerships, we will be able to reach out to you. And at the end of the webinar, you will see my email address so that you can reach out to me.
Thank you.
Okay, well, next we'll go with Donna Walker. Donna? Can you hear us? Okay, I'll try Jason Hernandez. Jason, you may now ask your question. Okay, I'll try another person, Alejandra Acosta. You can ask your question, Alejandra.
Hi, thanks for the time to ask the question. I did miss a portion of the webinar, so I'm hoping this question wasn't asked already. I'd like to hear more about institutions that have implemented work study or other creative ways to pay undocumented students for their work. And I'm asking this question in the context of the state of Michigan, where politics are a little complicated at the moment. And I think folks are more than anything, they're concerned or scared of what this may mean for them, for their institution. So to your knowledge, what are some of the practices that schools implemented to be able to help undocumented students get paid for their work?
Jesus, do you want to take that on? We did talk about it at the webinar, but maybe Jesus, you can briefly talk about that.
Yeah, and I would actually defer to a representative from Washington or California, right? Because both of these states have in-state tuition and state-based financial aid, and the state-based financial aid legislation is the piece that has allowed for the creation of a work-study program using state monies that is allocated for undocumented students. I've also seen that work-study program happen through private monies as well. And so those would be some of the two mechanisms in which work-study programs have functioned to my knowledge. But again, I'll defer to the wisdom from Washington or California.
Hi, this is Anna, San Jose State. So at least at the CSU level, I haven't seen anything as such as a work-study program. Perhaps more close, I would call it more like an internship and scholarship-based program that I've seen, not necessarily coming directly from the state, but what I have seen come from the UC system, which tends to have more unrestricted funding, is programs that are similar to a work study. So for example, UC Santa Cruz has what's called a professional career development program, and they model it after an internship program that UC Santa Cruz already had, called the Chancellor's Undergraduate Internship Program, that's really offered to any students that's currently enrolled in good standing who would like to work with a campus organization. And the program will fund for perhaps like half or 3/4 of the student's stipend or scholarship, and the organization that participates to host a student will pay for a fraction of the rest. So it's unrestricted funding that they utilize to be able to fund a work study like program for undocumented students. How other universities do it, I'm not too sure.
Thank you, Anna. And I know we're coming close to ending our time, so I want to leave a couple of minutes just to do some closure. Do know that there is something called the non-employment-based experiential fellowships. Those are fellowships that can be created for students in order to advance their education, and that there are ways that those could be paid. And we're going to be sharing some information on that via the Q&A handout that will be sent to you guys, to everyone here in a few days. So you'll hear more about that. So let me just close by just telling you about some resources that are out there. The top 3 that you have here are resources to tell you the latest update on the legal issues surrounding immigration. Great for that kind of information. And when you download this PowerPoint, and if you remember in the handouts section of your control panel, you can download the PowerPoint for this presentation. When you click on these logos, all the links are provided in that PowerPoint. Then you have organizations like My Undocumented Life, Immigrants Rising, and Dreamers Roadmap. Those 3 have lists of different scholarship programs for undocumented students, and Immigrants Rising has a whole variety of other resources also available in terms of leading leading workshops or how to provide other support systems to undocumented students. And they also have an immigrant intake program where a student can sign up through their intake system, provide information, and then a lawyer will get back in touch with them to go through their case to see if there are any legal solutions for that student. So that's a great resource for you. And then, of course, we have United We Dream that does a lot of advocacy for undocumented students. They have several tools to help institutions become better dreamer serving institutions. So these 7 organizations I would highly recommend that you go check out. And with that, let's see, we already did the question and answers. I want to really thank you for your time. We're excited that you are considering increasing the level of support that you have that you can provide to undocumented students. Here is everyone who's presented today, and also Miriam from the Presence Alliance. She is available to answer your questions too. These are our email addresses for you to contact us. And again, when you download the PowerPoint, you will get all of these. And with that, I want to thank you, everyone who's participated in this webinar, Maggie, Anna, Gregor, Jesus. Your expertise is invaluable. And thank you, everyone, for spending an hour and a half with us. Bye-bye.